Hi, everybody. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Hammer Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the Billy Wilder Theater this afternoon. Today, we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the publication of Rachel Carson's landmark book, The Sea Around Us. To Carson, the ocean was a teacher. I wrote agent, but I'm not sure that's really what I meant. Was a teacher and also our ancestor. As a visionary marine biologist, writer, and leader of the environmentalist movement, Carson represented the science of the ocean alongside an ethic of accountability to what she termed our mother sea. Today, in her honor, we've assembled an interdisciplinary group of Indigenous culture bearers, scientists, artists, and ocean storytellers to engage a wide range of perspectives about the cultures of ocean knowledge, including Indigenous stewardship, the history and science behind marine contamination by humans, its impact on ocean ecosystems and marine mammals, and how collectively we might chart a path toward healing and accountability through diverse practices of caring for the deep. Then at 7:30 tonight, we continue the program with a screening of the groundbreaking documentary Out of Plain Sight, a film from the LA Times and Pulitzer Prize finalist Rosanna Gia. The film is an expose of an environmental disaster lurking just off the coast of Los Angeles, and the film really flows like a thriller. In addition, we have a third program on Wednesday, June 3rd, where we're screening the artist film The Sea Around Us, and we'll continue this conversation with a panel following the film. Today, we expect this conversation to end at about 5:30 p.m., and after the discussion, we'd like to invite you all to continue the conversation over some light refreshments just outside of the theater doors. And our moderator today is Elizabeth DeLowry. She's a professor in the UCLA Department of English and the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. And she has co-organized all three programs with Rebecca Mendez, a practicing artist and professor at the UCLA Department of Design Media Arts. And they'll be coming out in just a moment to introduce the program. But first, we have a welcome from Tina Calderon, who is a culture bearer of the Tongva, Chumash, and Yoemi Indigenous people, and she's going to welcome us all into this space. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Tina Calderon.
Meiha wene hinkam ne twanya ne tinor duno calderon, komikre bet naha tongve, koi mix kanakan, koi yo eme, koi chicana. Awesh koneha ko avomanete hovet damet. Hello, my relatives. I'm Tinor Duno Calderon. I'm Gabrielino Tongva, Ventureño Chumash, Yoeme, and Chicana, and I'm happy to be here with all of you today. I'd like to just welcome you to Tovangad. And Tovangad is our word for world, the physical world, but it's also our word for the world that we knew, which is our territory. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the Tongva peoples, but most people think we're just the LA Basin, and we actually span from San Fernando Valley all the way south to Orange County, to Newport Beach, east along what you would know as the Santa Ana River, what we call as Kahopahait, the long river, and that goes all the way up to Riverside. We also held Corona, the city of Corona, and parts of West San Bernardino, and then back along the foothills. So that huge area was our territory. And we also held the 4 southern Channel Islands. So many of you have been to Catalina Island. That is our village of Pimungna. So I just wanted to share that. And also, I was asked to do a land acknowledgement. So I do want to start by acknowledging my tribal relatives, past, present, and emerging. We are the original Tarahatam, or peoples of Tovangad. And I am so grateful to my ancestors because they left us with so many amazing teachings. We do acknowledge that there was life here before humankind got to this realm. Our creation stories talk about the time before our time. And we had given very strict instructions by our creator that when we came here, we were to cause no harm. We were to help the nature to thrive, and that it would take care of us, just like we would take care of it. So we do believe nature is our relative. We do not ever separate ourselves from this nature. And so talks like this are very, very important because we will be talking about our sacred Momat, the salt waters. So I'm going to go ahead and offer an ancestor song, and then we'll close this up and we'll get into the talk here. Oh ahu ah, oh ahu ah, oh ahu ahu eh. Oh ahu ah, oh ahu ah, oh ahu ahu eh. Yarar como krehnuk betam, tu me komi kitame pai me. Yarar como krehnuk betam, tu me komi kitame pai me. Oh ahu ah, oh ahu ah, oh ahu ahu eh. Oh ahu ah, oh ahu ah, oh ahu ahu eh. Yarar como krehnuk betam, tu me komi kitame pai me. Yarar como krehnuk betam, tu me komi kitame pai me. Oh ahu ah, oh ahu ah, oh ahu ahu eh. Oh ahu ah, oh ahu ah, oh ahu ahu eh. Yarar como krehnuk betam, tu me komi kitame pai me. Yarar como krehnuk betam, tu me komi kitame pai me. Oh ahu ah, oh ahu ah, oh ahu ahu eh. Oh ahu ah, oh ahu ah, oh ahu ahu eh. Yarar como krehnuk betam, tu me komi kitame pai me. Yarar como krehnuk betam, tu me komi kitame pai me. Yarar como krehanuk vetam. We remember our ancestors. Awesh kondreha ahihirom kohinayanat. We thank our elders and we thank our teachers. Karukanakre eyotarhem. We stand with our children and the 7 generations to come. Thank you so much for allowing me to do this opening. I hope you really enjoy the program, and thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, first, Tina, for that really beautiful and very powerful opening. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. Rebecca and I, my dear friend and colleague, we have been dreaming of this moment for a long time, so it's just really exciting to see all of you here. Many of us on this stage first came together in 2022 at the Laguna Beach Art Museum for a conversation am I okay? Okay. Inspired by Rebecca's visionary installation called The Sea Around Us. We wanted to continue to build on the synergy of the group, particularly by blending our interdisciplinary approaches. So if the ocean teaches us anything, it's that we need all of our knowledges and experience combined to even begin to fathom its complexity. Even then, as Rachel Carson acknowledged, our understandings will always be partial of what she called that great mother of life, the sea. We've asked our esteemed panelists to respond to 2 questions rather than present distinct papers, because as teachers, Rebecca and I are committed to the way in which knowledge is co-produced. Inspired by Indigenous Pacific ways of being, we seek to teolava, or cultivate the space between, which is the wa or the va, between us here in this auditorium, but this also includes between us and the oceans, the mountains, and the rivers. It also refers to what Carson referred to as a kinship to all the children of the sea, including ourselves. To understand ourselves in complex webs of kinship is also to recognize that they are threaded by accountability and responsibility. With accountability, we also mean practices of care that are durational, ethical, and what Donna Haraway, our colleague up at Santa Cruz, calls staying with the trouble. The Montrose Corporation, the US military, and others dumped radioactive, alkaline, industrial, chemical, and DDT waste and munitions in at least 14 sites off the Southern California coast. Our ocean was treated as a repository for the toxic fallout of capitalism and militarism, and the ongoing war against nature. In Silent Spring, Carson warned against DDT in particular, referring to it as a biocide rather than insecticide. Chemical warfare is never won, she wrote, and all of life is caught in its violent crossfire. It is these legacies that we're addressing today. Any toxic dumping is a radical denial of our own embeddedness in place, and in this case in particular, the way in which the ocean is our source of life. Our task is not to transcend the gift of this earth, like the tech bros and their accelerationist motto, to move fast and break things, but to, in Haraway's words, and I'll quote from her, make trouble, to stir up potent responses to devastating events, as well as to settle troubled waters and rebuild quiet places. The ocean teaches us to give time, our attention, and our sustained care. So let me just introduce my dear colleague here, Rebecca Mendez. I should have said I'm Elizabeth DeLagree in the English department at UCLA with an affiliation with the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. This is my dear friend, Rebecca Mendez.
Thank you, Liz. Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank Claudia and her team for being essential partners in bringing our 3 events to fruition. And thank you to UCLA Teaching and Learning Center for your support. It brings me great joy to have been the catalyst that first brought this panel together at the Laguna Art Museum in 2022, and that brings us together now. None of these would have happened had I not stumbled upon a special report by Los Angeles Times environment reporter Rosanna Shah while researching for my own artwork, The Sea Around Us, which was exhibited at the museum in 2022. For this artwork, my desire from the very beginning was very simple: to learn about the ocean, to listen to the Eastern Pacific Ocean in all its polyvocality, the voices of its living beings, from marine mammals to plankton to the creatures of the deep, the voices of the local indigenous peoples and their long relationship with the sea, the voices of the ocean's own elemental forces. I wanted to enter into kinship with the ocean. Through Rosanna's report, I learned something that changed everything. From 1947 through at least 1972, the Montrose Chemical Corporation and others dumped more than 25,000 barrels of DDT, acid sludge, and radioactive waste near Santa Catalina Island, 30 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. Rosanna kindly introduced me to many of the scientists investigating this contamination, including members in this panel. I reached out to David Valentine, who was the first to document the barrels lying 3,000 feet below the surface, still leaching their toxic cargo, and who leads the ongoing DDT Plus investigations. He generously shared his ROV footage for the artwork. Dr. Tina Treody's research in marine geomicrobiology and DDT further shaped the direction of my video artwork. This discovery added another voice I had to listen to. So I listened, I leaned in. I tried to become with DDT, reciting a mantra. I am dichloro, diphenyl, trichloroethane. I am colorless, odorless. I am DDT. And here, of course, Alihini's, Aliwihara's research in ocean toxicology became essential. These toxic materials have bioaccumulated across the food web, devastating local marine mammals who now bear the highest cancer rates in the planet. Sea lions have suffered most. making the work of Dr. Elisa Deming and the Pacific Marine Mammal Center in Laguna Beach indispensable. The Sea Around Us directly references Rachel Carson's book with the same name, and is a 360-degree immersive and cinematic experience that portrays the Pacific Ocean as a fully animated body and a place of deep interconnectedness, where multi-species kinship fosters a sense of awe within us. In the Sea Around Us, we are guided by the abalone, a shelled marine snail that carries the sea's geologic time and has shaped cultures ancient and present. Among them are the Tongva and the Ahashiman, who have lived along this coast from time immemorial. I first met Reverend Adelia Sandoval, a Hashiman spiritual leader, at a kelp forest event in Laguna Beach, where I shared my drawing of the abalone shell as a mask, a transformational object. That meeting led to the filming of 3 generations of Hashiman women underwater with abalone shells. Adelia's song permeates the musical score of The Sea Around Us. The work is also framed by the poem 7 Are the Directions of the Tongva Tradition, which emerged from my conversations with Tina Urduno Calderon, culture bearer of the Tongva, Chumash, and Yoeme, whom I filmed underwater in full regalia as well. Throughout this creative process, my colleague and friend, Dr. Elizabeth Delohary, has been essential in framing the Sea Around Us within the visual and narrative production of 3 extraterritorial or outer spaces to imagine our ecological futures, the atmosphere, the ocean, and the poles. My deepest gratitude to all of you. And to face unmitigated disasters like the ravages of DDT, the feminist theorist Donna Haraway, committed as she is in multi-species environmental justice, asks us, stay with the trouble, to confront our repercussions of our troubled times, to embrace our entanglement with our non-human kin. Only then can we reckon honestly with our dominion and our negligence and reposition ourselves as similarly threatened creatures in the Anthropocene. It is from this place of equality and vulnerability that we open our imagination to other ways of knowing and other ways of being in this planet. And I close with a quote by the curator Stephanie Hessler, that writes, "While the arts may hardly save us, they could possibly generate momentary flashes of light that touch us, that wake us up, that show us that there may still be other ways. May the Sea Around Us and Rosanna's film Out of Plain Sight, which will be shown tonight in this auditorium, be 2 of those flashes."
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I want to send a special shout out to our students. Rebecca and I are co-teaching a class called The Sea Around Us, and we've coordinated this event around that. So I just want to thank all of you for coming, and thank all of our panelists really for taking the time to come up here from all the different places that you're originating from, and for staying with the trouble with us. So with that, we'll start our discussion. So as I mentioned, one of the things we wanted to do is actually to create an interdisciplinary conversation amongst us. Too often in the events that we're involved in, we usually get to say a little bit about our work and then the next person gets to speak. So instead, we wanted to create a dialogue with all these different backgrounds, the sciences, arts, Indigenous culture bearers, and literature. So we wanted to create this conversation and begin by one of the questions. And I guess, Rebecca, I guess we'll start with you. What is the ocean? Do you want to start? Okay, all right. So we're just going to go through. So we have 2 questions. One is, what does the ocean mean to you and your community? And then the second one is, what are the stories that we need to know about the ocean? So we've combined our slides. So behind us, you'll see the various slides and the elements that we want to touch on in our discussion today. So Rebecca, why don't you get us started?
Sure. There is this beautiful quote by Rachel Carson that it says, fish, amphibian, and reptile, warm-blooded bird and mammal, each of us carries in our veins a salty stream where the elements sodium, potassium, and calcium are in almost the same proportion as in seawater. And what Carson is telling us is that we are the sea. So when I think of what the sea means, it means us, right? It means that our very existence depends on us considering the ocean as alive, and that we not use it to, of course, be a dumping ground, and which is what we are finding. So to animate the deep, to actually bring all of you to understand that every little creature in this world matters, that they have stories, they themselves have communities, and negotiations between them and other species, so that when we consider ourselves part of the of life, it needs to include every single living thing. There's a beautiful thought of, when Sylvia Earle, oceanographer and inventor, an incredible person, says, without blue, there is no green. It is so true, because it's as simple as that. And so I think that, the stories, do you want me to answer both questions at once? No. Thank you. Because I would just go on.
You would think we just met. No, we're starting with one question.
Thank
then
you.
We'll come back.
It's like, okay, the other one is like, let me jam it now. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, it is such an honor to be in conversation with all of you, and thank you both for bringing such an interdisciplinary brain trust together for such a invigorating conversation. I had all these thoughts, and now you're activating me in a different direction. So I will start by saying I'm the coastal ocean reporter for the Los Angeles Times, and as a newspaper journalist, I tend to be a literalist, and as an environmental reporter, my job is to often translate the science and connect it to the policy. But I think in my journey as a storyteller, I've also been thinking a lot about what it means to give philosophical and emotional context to the data and to kind of the intellectual aspects of this conversation. So I'm going to, I can speak a lot to what the ocean means to me in a literal sense, as a place of, solutions, and as a body of water that we rely on, and also as kind of the receptacle of so much of our waste, and also the connectivity and truly the veins and blood of our planet. But I think what you just said reminded me of a poem that I have printed above my desk, and I actually have it bookmarked if I want. I'm going to read it. So I think, as a writer too, I often think about the ocean. It's technically a noun, but what does it mean to be a verb or an adjective? And from a story perspective, it is also the hero and the main character, but also the context and the background, and also the connective tissue of so many other aspects. And I think there's this poem by Natalie Diaz, who is Mojave, and the poem is called "The First Water is the Body," which really connects to what you just quoted from Rachel Carson. It's a very long poem, but this one stanza, and I apologize if I mispronounce some things, but she's Mojave, she writes about the Colorado River, but she writes about how, the body of water, if you think about the language, a river has arms, and this connectivity between our health and the oceans and rivers, and how it's truly inseparable. And so I'll just read this one paragraph from the poem. In Mojave thinking, body and land are the same. The words are separated only by the letters E and A. E-mot for body, A-mot for land. In conversation, we often use a shortened form for each, mot. Unless you know the context of a conversation, you might not know if we're speaking about our body or our land. You might not know which has been injured, which is remembering, which is alive, which was dreamed, which needs care. You might not know, we mean both. And so that paragraph is printed above my bulletin board in my desk, and it's a constant reminder to me that the way we think about the ocean, the way I write about the ocean, the way I piece together all of your work and contextualize and connect, ultimately the health of, our species, the health of us is so inseparable from the health of the ocean.
Hi, my name's Dave Valentine. I'm a professor of ocean science at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And as a scientist, what I'm going to say is probably going to be a little bit different from everything you just heard. But I'll start by stepping back. Hi, Tina. and saying that the ocean to me is not just something that I study. That is what I do for a living, is study the ocean. But I think I want to try and unpackage that a little bit for you. Like all children growing up, I desperately wanted to study marine disasters and pollution. Right? Isn't that how we all wanted to get our start? Growing up in the Central Valley, I mean, what more could you want? But the truth was, I started doing a lot of fishing, and my father was a fisherman. He's actually a retired university professor turned salmon fisherman, and so we spent a couple days a week fishing off the Golden Gate for salmon. Then the salmon fishery collapsed, and there were no more salmon off the Golden Gate, so he moved up to Alaska and would fish 3 months a year out of Alaska. And then that fishery began to collapse. And all the while, as I was getting my education and watching this progression, I was also realizing things like, every time a salmon bites on the hook, a 3-pound lead weight falls off and goes to the bottom of the ocean. That was how we would rig up for salmon. And we would go and buy hundreds of pounds of lead weight, and we would leave it on the bottom of the ocean. And I would joke, someday somebody's going to think that there was a big war here because there's all these cannonballs just littering the ocean floor. And that was my sort of first awakening. And in my generation, it was very much the big event was the Exxon Valdez and what happened in Alaska with that oil spill. And it always intrigued me through my junior high and high school time. And then I got into college and started, studying chemistry and the environment and biochemistry. And I started, sort of pulling those things together, not thinking that I was going to study the ocean until I was in graduate school and somebody asked me if I could go do science on a boat. And I said, sure, I can do anything on a boat. I've been, spending time in these seas in Alaska, and it just sort of stuck. And so it became both an occupation, but also drew in all these experiences that I'd brought with me from earlier in my life. And then it brought in the chemistry, and then it brought in the microbiology, which is something else I do. And suddenly, these disasters started looking like something that were studyable, that I could understand, that I could contribute to. And ultimately, that's what put me and my team in the place to find all of these barrels down off the coast of LA, 3,000 feet deep. We were there doing other things. We were doing very basic science having to do with other chemicals and microorganisms, but there they were. And that was sort of the first moment for me that I realized, there's really something worth studying here that is probably going to be important. So I'll pass it from there.
Okay, I think that's a great answer, and I think the theme for me, I'm Alyssa Deming, I'm a veterinarian that works specifically with wild marine mammals and other aquatic wildlife, but primarily marine mammals. And I was lucky enough, similar to many that have been inspired by the ocean, to grow up on it and around it. And for me, it was my dad and my brother and I getting kicked out of the house from our mom so she could have some alone time on the weekend, and we would go out fishing. And I remember just being so little and seeing, the dorsal fin, this vast flat ocean surface. And then a dorsal fin of a dolphin would pop up, and the mysteries of what was kind of below that surface was mind-blowing to me as a young kid. And I think that got me into paying more attention to the fish my brother and I were catching, all of the variety of things that were under that surface that we knew so little about and that we could see so little just by sitting on the top of it. And that really inspired me to get more into it and understand what is going on in the ocean as like an ecosystem. And depending on the age and stage of my life, just more and more kind of opened up of that connection of the ocean, and also being able to utilize the ocean as a place to relax and kind of ground myself, even as a young kid. So be it watching a sunset or a sunrise when I was in Florida, sitting on the beach, or being a surfer and going out and taking that energy from the waves, or being a scuba diver and being able to get into the reefs and see the fish. It was just such an incredible, vast mystery. And then as I progressed through my career, I've always loved animals. I knew I wanted to be a vet since I was a little kid. And I wanted to just help the health of any, really, animal. It was mostly kittens and dogs when I was younger. But then as I was a surfer, I started seeing sea turtles that had these giant tumors on them when I was in Florida. And I started doing a little bit of, research, as the general public calls it, where I just looked into it a little bit and found out that that was a combination of a viral infection and exposure to pollutants. And that kind of combination has kind of followed me through my career now, where I kind of utilize animals that live in the ocean as windows into ocean health. So now I'm a marine mammal veterinarian that works in a rehabilitation center. So my immediate gratification and day-to-day job is fixing the individual animals that present sick and injured and getting them back out there. But seeing that about 85 to 90% of the marine mammals that strand on our coast are directly or indirectly sick as a result of things that we've been doing to the ocean is really the main connection that drives my passion to do the kind of work, to tell the stories of these animals. And once I saw the number of sea lions coming in with cancer, if you live on this coast, you should really know we have the record in holding the highest rate of cancer of any wildlife species in the world. And it's a direct connection to these DDT barrels, decreasing the immune system of these animals, and they're mammals just like us. And so having a platform with artists and writers and journalists to be able to tell these stories is so important, because I think once people know that knowledge is power to take action and do something that can meaningfully make a difference.
Miyuyam. My name is Adelia, and I am from the Hashiman people, which are the people basically of Orange County, if that makes it easy for you to know. And so I'm very blessed to be here today among all these amazing storyteller people and good people. And so I was going, what am I going to say to these people, But I have something I want to read to you. I wrote many years ago, actually. I don't remember what year it was, but a long time ago. But it has to do with listening. And I think it'll start out really good for what I want to say here. A young woman was standing at the ocean's edge, feeling the salty spray on her skin. She smiled as she watched the sea foam moving across the minute pebbles of sand and heard them whispering. When the young woman was a little girl, she learned from her grandmother to pay attention to these simple things. She was told many things could be learned by watching, listening, smelling, touching, all life around her. Occasionally, she would sit all day as the sun would peek up over the hills in the early morning until it would get ready to go to sleep. She would listen and watch. She would hear the whisper of the wind, the cry of the hawk. A ladybug and bumblebee would pay her a short visit. She would smell the sweet red clay of the earth and dream. By the time the sun's golden glow would turn fiery colors and disappear beyond the ocean's edge, she had learned much. There was a time when she felt shy to listen to such whisperings. She thought she was eavesdropping and hearing secrets that were not for her ears to hear. The little girl's grandmother had chuckled lovingly at this concern. She told her, if Mother Earth, to Mayawoot, and all living things didn't want her to know something, they wouldn't speak in a way for her to hear and understand. They wouldn't speak to her in a way for her to hear and understand. It was Mother Earth's intention for her to hear. This is why you must pay attention. From that day forward, the young one listened with all of her heart. It was in this way that she fell in love with all life around her. And so, my gift that I was given is that I had a teacher for many years who taught me the old ways. And she learned from her teachers before that. And I was blessed. And she taught me about this listening, about paying attention. And she shared with me the very first ocean that we swam in was the ocean of our mother's womb. Each of us, every single one of you here, were in that ocean. Because that same salt, those same elements of your mother's womb is just like the ocean itself. And so we all are sea creatures in many ways. And so that's why listening for all of us is so important, because we all have that yearning to find out We all have that learning to discover. We all have that learning. We have that ache, actually, within us to do these things. And so it's just bringing back the old ways. You know, in Canada, there's a teacher, and I forget his name, but he talks about the two-eyed view, the two-eyed vision, which I think we've learned here too, is that we've been westernized, so to speak. We've been acculturized into looking at the world in a certain way. But the indigenous people, the people of the land, they have another way of looking. But because of the influence of the Western ways, you know, now we have two-eyed vision. So we're walking around looking at the, you know, the world with two eyes, you know, like, oh, okay, I see from there and there I see. So my whole hope is that we begin to see with that vision of the ancestors, the vision of the indigenous peoples, because we all come from an indigenous world. Each of us, if we went way back into our past, we would find that we all have those similar teachings. We just forgot. And so once we discover these things, this is how we begin to bring that into our daily lives. We begin to teach our young ones these ways so that when they go, they will listen to the ocean's edge. And so how I hold the ocean is that she is my grandmother. She's grandmother ocean. That's what we call her. There's another in our language, but grandmother ocean. And grandmother ocean is the emotions of the earth. So, you know, when the tide goes wild and crazy, you know, there's a part of our Mother Earth that's expressing herself through the waves of grandmother ocean. It's just fascinating to me, you know, to see that when she's calm, you know, the earth is calm. And then she has a relationship with all the elements. And the wind, the ocean and the wind are in love with each other. And I love when the great Hunglawoot blows. It comes from the canyons, you know, we call it the Santa Ana winds. Comes from the canyons and it's just rushing and get out of my way, I'm going to her, get out of my way. And what she's doing, she's going to the ocean. This strong wind is going to the ocean because he's in love with her and he has to be with her. And oh my God, if I can just get to her. And then they meet and push. You can just hear the explosion on the cliffs as the waves hit because suddenly that wind and the ocean have met. And so you go, oh. So it's like paying attention to these things. You become part of this life, this ocean life. And we've been so blessed to live along the coast here. So it's, you know, there's many lessons. And I'm just really, I'm just in awe of the ocean and what she does. And we also have in our creation stories, we have the ocean. The big part of the ocean is, really quickly, I will just tell you brief. There's so many other parts to fill in this story, but there's one of our stories that we come from the stars. And so what happened was, this beautiful blue orb was saying, come to me. So they came. But when they came, they landed in the ocean and not on the land. And when they fell onto the earth at the Tumayawut, they went into the ocean and they took on a form because they didn't have a physical form, and they took on the form of the dolphin. And then they saw the sea turtle playing one day and they go, I want to know how to do that. Walk up on the sand and then come back and play in the ocean again. So then some of them, not all of them, turned into the sea turtle, the pahila. And then one day, far enough, let's see, when you go to Catalina on a boat and you look back towards the coast, you can see Saddleback Mountain. And no matter how far you can see it, because all that stuff just disappears and there's this bump. And so the sea turtle saw that bump and said, what would it be like to walk upon that bump? And perhaps we could see from a really higher place, and we could be close to our ancestors once again. And so they became the two-legged to walk upon the mountain. So it's like we have this relationship, this thread to the past. And so that is why, you know, we feel so deeply as coastal peoples that relationship to the ocean. It's so important to us. It's, you know, it's part of who we are. And even if we don't go to the ocean for the week, let's say, you know, it still pulls us to that place. And so when we hear these things about the DDT and when we discovered what was going on, you know, with regard to in making this sea around us, it was just devastating. It was really devastating to feel that, to see that, to know what's going on. And I get really angry at us as human beings because we like to hide our stuff. You know, we like to get rid of it. And the ocean has become a place where we think nobody's going to know. But it's coming out. It's been coming out for a long time now. And so we're reacting to it. And it's like, well, what are we going to do? You know, all we can do is just fix things, like fixing the animals, hoping that we can help them. And so this is what we got ourselves into. And it's like, how do we fix it? The only thing I can say is let's teach the new ones, the young ones, the new generations to do things differently. And there's so much more I want to say to you all. I mean, I ramble. But I just know that we just need to begin doing things in a different way, in a good way, in a respectful way.
Thank you very much. Oh, is this on? Okay. My name is Tina Treuder. I'm a professor here at UCLA, and I apologize for being late. I had to teach a class. And my relationship to the ocean started maybe a little bit different. I come from a small German village where there was no connection to the ocean. It's like a 2.5-hour drive. But I got really hooked up with nature. Like the garden of my parents was like my adventure, where I, did little experiments and looked for sorting organisms and stuff. And so I got really into animals first. And but then when I was a teenager, our neighbor, he was a scuba diver, and so he put me into a neoprene suit and taught me how to dive, and brought me to the ocean to dive there into, it was actually the Baltic Sea. And that's how I got hooked up. I thought maybe animals in the ocean is interesting. And so I, continued that path and found a university where I can study the ocean. And from that, it took an interesting turn because I was so hooked up to animals. I did actually my diploma thesis about deep sea scavengers. So I studied animals, but then I had an opportunity to go to help on an expedition as an undergrad, where I learned how important microbes are in shaping cycles of elements in the ocean. And also microbes were around the first 2 billion years of our planet, and they developed, they brought the oxygen, they brought a lot of the processes that are driving element cycling on our planet. And so without, and this, as we think, started all in the ocean. So the ocean is really like the origin of life on our planet, and from there, it continued to land. And so I spent a lot of time on the ocean for my research, same as Dave and Lihini. We have actually been on expeditions together. And I'm also teaching oceanography in a general education class. Maybe some of my students are here now, I don't know. And and so, oh, nice. And so in the first lecture I give in my oceanography class, I always show this picture of Earth, and I say, 70% of our planet is covered by water. Isn't it funny we call it Earth? And of course, you could make a section through Earth, and of course there's a lot of solids. But if you really look at the livable environment, then the ocean is the largest environment for life on our planet, and not only by the area that it covers, but if you take the 3-dimensional space, we have an average 4,000 meter water depth in the ocean, and that is all occupied by organisms. And but if you look, on the other hand, how much is protected in the ocean versus land, you recognize that we are very land focused, because we cannot live under the water unless we do scuba diving or we take a submersible. And so we have this restricted view, and we protect what we know very well. We protect the land, and there are far more protected area, and I'm happy there are so many protected area on land, but the oceans are lagging really behind. And that makes me sad, because we need to realize what the ocean is giving to us, and that we need to pay more attention to it, and increase our protection of it.
Thank you, everyone. It's been inspiring, so hopefully I won't bore you too much with my own story, but I came to the ocean pretty late, which is funny because I was born in Sri Lanka, which is a island nation, but the relationship that I had growing up with the ocean was one where it was really I was told it was a dangerous place, and so I didn't swim. I don't swim well today. I don't scuba dive. but then I moved, and then I moved to Zambia in Southern Africa, which is landlocked. But there, like Tina, I just became sort of nature was my sibling in a way. I spent so much time outside, observing things and doing experiments and painting snails and seeing if they'll come back in a year and things like that. And so I became really fascinated with just how things worked. And much later, after I actually did my degree, my bachelor's degree, I had the opportunity to do some science related to the ocean. And then I really began to appreciate, and Tina talked a little bit about this, what the ocean means to me is this environment that holds so much information about the history of this planet, how it came to being. I mean, it's amazing, right? The longest records of Earth's history are, primarily extracted from the ocean, so we can look back millions and millions of years to the last time carbon dioxide concentrations were this high in the atmosphere, the last time temperatures were this warm. And so to me, it became this environment that held so much information, and I wanted to learn everything I could about that, and teaching actually is probably how I've learned the most about the ocean. And within that, my small piece, the ocean, the way I think about the ocean, and I say this in the movie and I apologize, but it's true. I think about it in terms of molecules and the stories that the molecules can tell about all the things that have happened there, whether it's life, how old the ocean waters are, the last time the ocean waters were breathing from the atmosphere. So there's just so much information, and that, as a chemist, that really drew me in, the power of the stories that were written in molecules. And that sort of is what brought me to this project, really, is that when I started looking in the ocean, I was not just the natural molecules that were there. I could, all the imprints of human activity also were revealed in the samples that I was studying. That's true every day. There's nothing that we look at that doesn't have some imprint of human activity. I mean, it's the genius, right? All these amazing things that we've produced to combat pests, but they're designed to not, to last, right? They're designed not to be broken down by bacteria. And so I think what really means to me today is that, and as someone who just sort of looks at the ocean through the molecules in it, is that we really can't disentangle our impact from that of nature. And I don't think, it's impossible to study the ocean without seeing the imprints. And that is the Anthropocene, right? Every part of what I look at has been touched by human activity. And so that is what it means to me, is how we've essentially started transforming the history. So now the ocean holds the history also of our impact and of our development and our activities. So that's what it means to me.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. This has been so interesting. I know so many of you through your professional relationships, and it's great to hear people's personal experience with the sea, which is kind of why one of the reasons that Rebecca and I came up with these questions is kind of see what inspired you. I know we have a lot of students here who are thinking about where they're going to go. Some of you are graduating in just a few weeks, so I know that you're thinking very hard about where to pursue your interests. And one of the things that really strikes me too is how our connections with the sea, and so many of the comments here are very much tied to a local sense of place, right? And that also was my experience growing up on the coast just south of Boston in an area that had tons of tidal pools. And I know one of our students here first experienced tidal pools just recently, and I hope all of you will. We have some amazing ones on this coast. But to me, that experience, and I grew up in a fishing community and with lobstermen, and we did clamming and all kinds of things. So we had a very close connection to the sea. And what that meant to me is that I didn't see the ocean so much as a universal, right? So kind of thinking at the multiscalar, we talk quite a bit in our class about the ocean is both a molecular being, right, but it's also 90% of our biosphere, right? So the kind of movement back and forth between the kind of micro and the macro scales. But my experience was very local, right? We knew the sharks that came in. We knew when the great whites would going to be, we knew when the sand sharks would be coming. We knew when the jellyfish would be coming. There are certain cycles that we were very attuned to. So it became really strange for me once I pursued this degree in literature, was to realize that when you study literature, there's, and I hope they're not still teaching this, but I was taught that the themes are man versus man versus the environment, right, and man versus himself, right? And I thought, these are so limited in terms of the stories that we can tell about the ocean. If it's man versus nature, right, it's the understanding that we are not actually part of nature, that we're not in an Anthropocene moment, in which case the human impact on the globe is recognized at the deepest points, right? In the Marianas Trench, there's plastic, right? I mean, so there's all kinds of ways that we understand that those narratives are actually teaching us to not understand ourselves in nature, right? And so that in those frameworks, so this is, my students know this very well, that we work very hard at thinking about why is it when you sign up for a literature class, it's focused on a nation? What does it mean? Why aren't we learning Tongva stories to start out our literature classes, right? Why are we learning stories about England? So it's a kind of think through. It's not that we don't need the universal, the larger scales, but to think through, like, what would it mean to understand our relationship in an embodied way and in a local way? So some of the stories, Adelia, that you were telling have to do with that. Those are local stories, right? And so there are ways in which you have a connection to place through a local storytelling practice, and that may not necessarily be a universal scale, right? And again, universal scales would give us all kinds of taxonomies and understandings of science, but to actually have a sense of embodied place. So I'll read one of the quotes that you'll see on the slide here, which is the quote from Carson that many of us have been referring to, which is that each of us carries in our veins a salty stream in which the elements of sodium, potassium, and calcium are combined in almost the same proportion as in seawater. This is our inheritance. And I think I love this, so she's writing as a biologist, but she's speaking in terms of inheritance. This is our inheritance from the day, untold millions of years ago, when a remote ancestor, again using metaphors of kinship, having progressed from the one-celled to the many-celled stage, first developed a circulatory system in which the fluid was merely the water of the sea, right? And so some scientists are calling this hypersea, that we're all from the sea, and so we're just kind of post-sea or post-ocean, even though we're carrying it in our bones, in our blood. So this idea of this kind of embodied relationship, and one of the things that has really gotten me to find so much admiration in Rachel Carson's writing is this inspiration that she was using Western models of science, or what some would call settler science, but she was using it to actually establish kinship relationships. And by establishing kinship, then you have a sense of accountability and responsibility, right? And so that, to me, was a very radical thing to be doing in 1951. I encourage you, if you have a chance, to read her 1961 version of The Sea Around Us, because 1951 to 1961, we had the detonation of 67 thermonuclear weapons by the U.S. and the Marshall Islands, and that's something, if you're born after 1954, you're carrying strontium-90 in your bones from those detonations. So that actually gave us an understanding. Oh my God, I tell my students, I'm like, I'm not going to keep going. Okay, so I will go into that whole thing, but the radioactive waste that was both the dumping of all kinds of weapons by Russia and the U.S., especially in the Pacific, was something that Carson was writing about in her 1961 preface, right? And she is furious. Her write-up there is scathing, and I think it's a very important moment to kind of think through where the ocean was in 1951 and then where it was after 1961 due to militarism, right? And DDT was first used on troops in World War II to fight lice, right? So again, it's this kind of these military histories. I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room thinking very much about militarism in the U.S. right now, and so these legacies are the ones that are now that we're carrying in our bodies and bones. But I want to end on not such a dystopian note, to bring back the words of Sylvia Earle, who's a person I just so admire. In fact, I saw her on this stage quite a few years ago. She's an oceanographer. She was down in the Tektite when they had these all-male labs. They had one all-female lab under the sea called Tektite, and she was one of the oceanographers there. And then, of course, has been doing these blue hope spots around the world. But the thing that she says is that The most important thing we extract from the ocean is our existence. And I love that because the move to continue to drill for more oil or drill for more, and I'll talk about that when we come back around, but the idea of extraction, that we might actually think about extraction as a process of our own life, right? And the way in which our bodies carry that history, and the way in which we're dependent on the ocean for no matter how far, even if you don't see the sea until you're, in your adulthood, we breathe because of the ocean, right? And the creatures of the ocean.
Thank you. So much of what has been said, it resonates with me already, but taking it back to kinship. So in our creation stories, for both the Tongva and the Chumash, we're both coastal nations, and we're mariner societies. And so we do have stories around the ocean. We also are taught to approach the ocean and all waters, as a matter of fact, in a respectful means. We do believe that it's not just a resource, it is a relative. And so when we go to the ocean, and my grandchildren know this, is we actually are introducing ourselves to a body of water that's not the same. It moves. It's not the exact same waters. These are like, they have spirit. And so when we approach the ocean, we introduce ourselves first, and we touch it gently, and we put some on our head, and we let the ocean know that we're here in a good way. And we offer prayers, we offer songs, and then we go ahead and enjoy that water source. It's important because we know that water is life. Nothing can live without it. But water can also take our lives away. So that's why respect is so important. And so when I think about our Chumash peoples, our creation stories began at Limu, the island of Santa Cruz. We started there. And then when we were too many people, we were brought over to the mainlands by a rainbow bridge. And the people were told not to look down because they would get dizzy and fall. And some people listened, and some people could see the shimmering of the water, and they were curious, and they looked down, and they started to fall in. And Mother Earth started asking Creator, please save my children, please save my children, they're gonna drown. And at first Creator said, no, you gave very strict instructions and they didn't listen. This is their fate. And Mother said, please, please, they're my children, save them. And so finally Creator did take pity, and he started to change these beautiful relatives so that a tail was formed and fins were formed. And these beautiful creatures that were first human become dolphin, alakoi. And so we do believe that we are related to them. On the Tongva side, our stories go back to where there was very little water in the ocean, because it talks about the Ice Age, and it talks about when the water started to melt, and it talks about all the life that was in the ocean. And like I had said earlier, our creation stories even talk about the time before humankind was here. So it's so important for us to be respectful to this relative, the oldest relative that we have. Our stories also tell us about how the land was formed and why it's called Turtle Island for us. So I'll make it short because I know we're taking a lot of time. But I just want to leave that because now I work for Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples, and my position is the director of our Ocean Protectors Program. And why do we need an Ocean Protectors Program? And that's because humankind is so unthoughtful, and they don't think about the harm that they're creating. And it's ongoing. You know, DDT is a forever chemical. It's not gonna just disappear one day, but there's other toxins that are still getting into our water systems. And so as humans, we have to use our voices. We have to talk to those people who are making the laws and the rules and how things will be done. So we spend a lot of time talking to federal, state, and city officials. We work very closely with environmental organizations. We are an Indigenous-led environmental organization, and it's very important for us to be at the tables because we are not just talking about the safety of peoples, which is important, but the safety for the animals, the safety for the plant life. Everything deserves to live healthy, and it's us humans that are causing that damage. Thank you.
I can't believe how timely we've been. I'm tasked with keeping track, and we're right on time. So, so feel free to, to talk to each other as well. We have a second question, which is, what are the most important stories or story that we need to know about the ocean now? And I would also invite our panelists to comment on the slides that you provided. So we have a few things here. I'll quickly mention that there's been a deep sea worm that's been named after Rachel Carson. It hasn't been finally approved, but you'll see that coming around. And so why don't I have Rebecca, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Let's see. So I think that there's two things that to me matter in terms of stories, right? I know that I love Donna Haraway when she says, it matters what stories tell stories, right? So it is something that we need to be very, very conscious about, the time, the limited time we have in our lives, and then what stories do we put forth, and what do we repeat? So one of the things that, one is around interdisciplinarity, right? That it is very important to cross boundaries. And the other one is, of course, interspecies relationships. So it's a way of weaving. A lot of the times our separations, how we have divided our world in disciplines and in gender and in, species, all of those things just keep us dislocated. So one of the things that to me, for example, when I first came across your story, Rosanna, is like, this is something that immediately I felt, maybe I backtrack. It's like my artistic practice is what it's called research-based fieldwork practice. And what that does is that the primary part of that artistic practice is interdisciplinarity. So when I read your articles, it was a way of my being able to say that needs to be told in so many different ways, needs to be shared with the world. And you being so generous that you opened the doors to my being able to meet Dave and Alisa and so many other people, Lihini, and it was the more that we speak about how is it that we bring understanding, deep understanding of something that it is as essential as that of the ocean, that it is our life, is something that I think the more we talk to each other and connect, the better. When I think of I love the fact that only 10% of my genome is human, right? And that I am bacteria, I am archaea, and I am the virus. It's like, I am many. And it just feels so good to lose that identity of a human species as like these Homo sapiens, and I'm thinking now about octopus sapiens, and it's like all the intelligences of all these other creatures. So it's a beautiful way of breaking your, la coraza, the shell that we have, and suddenly become abalone, right? So in my piece, in my artwork, one of the things that I thought is like, let's befriend the most uncharismatic creature, abalone. So you want to see how I befriended abalone? So I am diving and I'm looking at abalone from afar, and I'm just thinking, okay, they eat kelp. So I put a little piece of kelp. It's not taking. And I put a little piece of kelp. Not taking. I was trying to feed kelp by the butt. So this is something that the diver just held me out and just moved to the other side and just I started munching. So it's something that it takes a little bit of time for you to just suddenly try to befriend another species, and you really kind of shed so much of your sense of hierarchy. So anyway, interspecies friendships.
Oh boy. It is really hard to go after Rebecca. That was beautiful. I also feel like it's hard to be second to this question because I think, again, being the literalist, I look at all of you and I think of all the story ideas I have. I call them crock pots. I literally have 100 folders, and it's a chaotic system. And every time I get a new little factoid or an idea, I'll put it into a separate folder, and they're my ingredients. And then I'm like, okay, when is it time to turn up the heat on this crock pot? But I look at Dr. Deming and I'm thinking domoic acid. I think of, look at Liz and I'm thinking deep sea mining, Lahini, ocean acidification. So I won't take away all those. There's like micro, very specific stories. Dave, I've got so many crock pots brewing on. I have so many story ideas and so many issues that I'm following as the coastal ocean beat reporter for the Times. But how do I want to answer this question? I think thematically, I feel like the ocean is sometimes confined within a genre, and I don't think it should be, because it is a planet that it covers more than 70% of our planet. It is. I'm thinking as you were all speaking, this quote from a deep sea explorer at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. He once told me, he was like, if an alien expedition came to Earth and decided to study the life forms on this planet, like they would go to the ocean first, not the land. And I think of that too. That's like, we do have such a land-centric way of thinking about our relationship to this planet, but the stories are in the ocean. And that's where the aliens would go first, try to understand this planet. But I think thematically, I think of, I get constantly pitched too. I get like 300, 400 emails an hour. And I think and my computer is chaos. So, and I think that I often get pitched stories about the future, all the blue economy solutions and turning to the ocean as all these different, climate tech solutions. And, the ocean is going to capture all our carbon. It's going to transform all these things. It's going to, aquaculture and kelp, like all of these things that are the ocean we are relying on for future solutions. And then I talked to, experts like Dave and Tina and, thinking about all of the history and the things that we've already done to the ocean that we didn't even know about. And it's just like, there is a hole in our lifeboat that we haven't even resolved. And I think until we fully learn all the lessons of our past, learn about everything that has already happened in the ocean, go as far back to what Tina and Adelia are referencing, and bringing all of this knowledge and wisdom into the present as we think about the future. Like, we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And so for me, the story of the future as it relates to the ocean is also a story of the past. And as we live in this present and we think about how we bring all of this knowledge together, again, on a micro individual LA Times article level, there are hundreds and hundreds of stories and so many folders and notes and emails that I need to organize. But I think from a thematic and universal and philosophical perspective, I think even just like a conversation like this, these conversations need to exist and happen more often. I am grateful to all of you for just bringing so many forms of wisdom into conversation with each other.
Well, it's really hard to follow both of you. So the first thing I'll say is whatever she's working on is worth understanding what's going on. I think as a university professor, as a scientist, I feel very fortunate because I am not constrained by what we know. And so, my trade is to try and understand what is happening in the ocean, what human activities are doing, and oftentimes, and I think the DDT story is an example, we don't understand what we've done in the past. We don't know exactly what's going on now, and as scientists, that's where we get to go out and try and provide that understanding. So, I'll just give you a couple examples of from the past, and also, at least some of the things I'm thinking about now. The first real environmental story I tried to work on, I failed to be able to work on it. A cargo ship carrying soybeans to China ran aground outside of a small bay in Alaska. It's broken half, and 1 million pounds or several million pounds of soybeans come dumping out into this pristine little bay where I happen to have done my PhD work. And I had spent 5 weeks at anchor in this little bay way out in the Aleutians. And I tried to get out there to understand what happens, when you have this sort of loading of soybeans. It can't be good for that environment. I wasn't able to get out there. It was winter. Nobody wanted scientists poking around. So I was unable to do it. But that was, the first time I really thought, wow, I could make an interesting scientific study of this sort of human disaster that had occurred there. And then I started actually practicing that. And when the Deepwater Horizon happened, I was one of the people that was fortunate enough to be granted vessel time by the federal government to go out and study that disaster in ways that that other non-scientists would not really think about the microorganisms that are responding and what's happening in the deep ocean and how is oil being trapped and where's the dispersant going, these sort of very fundamental scientific questions that needed answering. And then oil spills, they keep happening. We keep drilling. We keep having pipelines along the California coast. And so that has become, I think, a recurring theme for me when these events are happening. And the Refugio spill right off Santa Barbara, just a few miles from my workplace and my home, is another example where it became a scientific study about what was happening. And so, there we get to, we being my collaborators, myself, my students, my colleagues who are interested in this, we get to use these events to understand how nature behaves, but we also get to inform what the future is going to look like and how the Earth is going to respond, what's going to be required for healing. So that's sort of the trajectory to give you an idea of the sorts of questions I've asked and some of the directions we're going now. I mean, I'm looking at what's happening in the Middle East and in a very different way than everybody else. I'm tracking the oil spills. I'm looking at where things are being blown up, that suddenly you have this environmental catastrophe unfolding that nobody's talking about because there's this human catastrophe that's happening right alongside. And in the future, we're going to take a look at these environmental catastrophes and realize what was really happening there as well. The same thing happening along the coast in the Black Sea right now, where oil refineries are being hit by drones. You have these massive spills. So these are examples of the kinds of things I'm thinking about. Closer to home, I'm looking very closely at what's happening with oil spills and pipelines along the Santa Barbara shore. And the other thing that we're starting to look at is what happened to all the sewage in LA back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it turns out that in the course of studying what was happening to the DDT, we now see that about a third of that sewage never actually went anywhere. It's just sitting at the seafloor today. We can map it, we can identify it, we figured out where it is, where it went, and it's just there. So these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about, and with this idea of like we can go out with the right tools and define problems that I think we never really thought about in a serious way.
Yeah.
Adding things to my crock pots.
Like this should be easy to follow. I mean, I will say that to that context, as a veterinarian, I am a very clinically approach to the stories that I feel like you guys should know. I have, had the unfortunate experience of having to see what a sick ocean produces to the animals that really rely on that, and we are included in that term, animals that rely on the oceans. So for me, I think the story that I would love kind of everybody to take home today for the oceans is how sick it truly is and how everyone in this room is responsible for that. We all have to take some individual ownership of our day-to-day life and the impact we're having on this environment in order to really make a meaningful difference. We want laws and policies to be changed. We want, the city to protect it and have better sewage treatment plants. We wish we can go back in time and stop the DDT from getting poured into it. But in reality, we really haven't learned from those lessons. And whether or not it's DDT or if it's sewage or if it's pharmaceuticals or all of these synthetic chemicals that we're producing, we use them in a very short term. All of the plastics, the single-use plastics we're using, it's convenient for our life, and we're all a part of that consumption. So for me, it's really easy to see every day. We literally just took a plastic packing wrap off of the neck of a sea lion yesterday. So it's a very real issue for me. So every time I go to the grocery store, I'm not going to buy something that's wrapped in plastic because I just met that animal. And so it's a very tangible thing as a veterinarian for me that gets to interact with wildlife and do my best to help it. But the real story, I think, behind all of it is there's direct and indirect impacts that we're having on the ocean as a result of our decisions every day. And I think one of the biggest things is how the ocean drives our entire climate and ecosystem across, not just the coastline, but the entire continent. And so right now there's a massive marine heat wave that has made its way down from the Arctic that has hugely impacted the sea surface temperatures to a higher degree than we've ever seen historically in geological history, at least. And that is the result of climate change, the amount of carbon dioxide we're putting into the ocean. And that results in a chain of effects people really don't know. And so because of that heat wave that came down, the anchovies and sardines that kind of live in that first 20 meters of water are diving down deeper because they're ectothermic and they like their comfortable niche in their environment. And so the fish can go down deeper and enjoy a slightly cooler temperature, but the diving seabirds cannot. And so if you guys have been on the coast and noticed over the past few months, there's been starving seabirds, mass strandings by the thousands. That is because of climate change. That is because of the actions we're choosing to do every day. And that's something, it angers people in the immediate time frame where they see the bird on the beach, but it's not impacting them to take away that message and change the day-to-day action that they're doing. And we really did get into this by the actions of the masses combined. And so what you do every day actually does really matter. And if you can make an impact in your day-to-day life, that's the first step. And then you try and make an impact locally, and then you try and make an impact globally. And those little the actions, like doing something, making that decision not to buy the tomatoes that are wrapped in plastic, but instead bringing your own bags, it really does matter. So I think both the direct things like oil spills, I was also unfortunately a large part of my research career was dedicated to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the northern Gulf of Mexico. The dolphins and manatees in that area are still sick and having decreased reproductive success. Those are very visual things that elicit a visceral response that we're all disgusted with. But did it change the purchase of your car or the amount that you're using a bike instead? So I think my story that, for me, and I hope all of you will take, is that your actions matter, and kind of decide what side of history you want to be on when you make your decisions in day-to-day life.
Thank you for that, Alyssa. I'll just add to thread that back to Dave, that it's the plastics are the byproduct of the oil industry, right? So, which is also why someone has declared war, right? So these are all intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my. So I'm going to tell a story. This is an important story. And I always like to bring things. I have two abalone shells here. This one is the cutest thing. It's a black abalone shell. At one time, there were thousands along the coast of California, thousands and thousands. And then this here is a red abalone. It's beautiful. Both of these have been given gifts. They were gifts to me. I didn't go out and hunt them or anything. This one's name is 143. This one was taken by a diver, and right now I forget his name. I'm getting up in age. I'm starting to forget people's names. Anyway, and 143 to me means I love you. I don't know if everybody's ever heard that. So I cherish this one, and I'm going to give you a blessing when we're done here. I'm going to hold her up and have her look at you. And for thousands of years, my ancestors lived along the coast, and there was no abalone shortage. There was no red abalone shortage. There was no black abalone shortage for thousands and thousands of years. And then human beings started just taking them and taking them and taking them and taking them in a very short amount of time. The black abalone disappeared along the coast of Orange County. This is all in recent years. I think like the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s. By the 60s, maybe there was none. And we're trying, or I think it became the official seashell of California, the black abalone in the last year. And what's so beautiful about this story of this little black abalone is It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 little holes, and each of those holes has a little tentacle that comes out because it's on the coast, and so it has to hold on so hard because when, grandmother, I told you about her waves, when she starts carrying on, they need a really big muscle to hold on because they're along the coast, they're not in the ocean. And so it's kind of like a metaphor for us. Are we going to be a black apple holding on to life, making sure that we don't let go so that we won't, just get rushed away? The other thing is they cleaned up the edges of the ocean. That's their job, is to clean up the old yucky kelp and things like that. So they were kind of like, I was told, like the vacuum cleaners of the edge of the ocean. But a precious being, and in our language we call this shell Isla, this being. And inside the shell, Rebecca mentioned, is trying to feed this, wrong end at first, but they are majestic beings. They have eyes. They have features, and they are so beautiful. They have a knowledge, a wisdom. So, that's what we are missing, is we forget that the creatures in the ocean are living, vibrant beings who have a way, who have a communication, and we just take advantage and just use. And then this here was, the red has a fewer legs, 1, 2, 3, 4 is pretty much the average of a red abalone. They live along, deep along the edge in the water. And so divers, to get them, they have to go and dive to get them. And so anyway, and the point I wanted to make about that is that they disappeared very quickly. Now, when human beings get out of the way, when they leave things alone, things get better. We have evidence about this during COVID time, when people stayed home and didn't drive much, and there was a lot that started improving. And the 7 miles of Laguna Beach coast, it's marine protected area. Well, I think there's 6 miles of marine protected coast. So what is happening is the black abalone, we have evidence to show that they're coming back little by little. They're hiding, they're scared because, somebody's going to see me and want to eat me or something, even though they were not that edible because their muscle was so hard that it was really a lot of work to get them soft to eat. So that's why they weren't that popular to eat, but they still got eaten. And there were piles and piles of seashells at one point. So, I'm just saying that the less that we get involved with things and the more we listen, in other words, take advantage, the more we cause harm. But when we sit back and just enjoy and be at peace and listen, things get better. So that's one of the points. And then there's a story I want to tell you. Another story I think is important. I have often gone to schools and spoken to students. And I was sharing about how our ancestors would go to the willow trees and to the tule along the coast, and that's what they made their homes out of, very similar to our cousins here in the north. And they did not kill the willow to take the willow branches. They just took what they needed. They didn't kill all the tule. They didn't rip it out, to take it. They just took what they needed to make the homes of which our ancestors lived, called quiches. So I was sharing this story, and these little kids, I think they were 4th, 5th graders. One boy goes, well, why didn't they just chop down all the trees and make houses like we do today? And it was like, that was whoa, I wasn't expecting that. But what I realized from that was, why didn't they do that? And they didn't do that because they saw the trees as living and vibrant beings. They saw them not different from themselves, but very much a living thing that had a role in a part to play. And they saw that the trees had other creatures living in it as their home. They did not ever think to ever kill a tree. And the limbs that they got were limbs that fell, or limbs that they felt that the tree would give them. So it was all about give and take, a reciprocity, but it wasn't just taking it because they didn't see a life. It was like they saw everything as alive. And so I think that's really important. Because in order to go to a forest and just start grazing and chopping down trees because you want to build homes, there's something not right there. And that's what we do as human beings. We take and we take and we take and we take and we take some more. And the other thing is that I've noticed the story of, anything that we create, we never think all the way through to the end about what's going to happen. It's just like when you mentioned the DDT was used to kill the bugs on the soldiers. Never thought about what that stuff was going to do in the future, you know? And so therefore we have this huge problem right now that all of us are going to suffer from at some point because those barrels are dissolving. That's really scary. Those barrels are dissolving and they're not that far away from us. What's going to happen? That's really scary. I go, you know, I like start freaking out. And then, you know, I just have to have a peace and just trust that everything is unfolding as it should. You know, I think that there should be good things that we share so that when we leave here, we can do good things and that we don't have to be afraid. But I think the main thing that I really want to point out is we need to teach our children. We need to teach them so they won't say, well, why don't we just cut all the trees down and build houses? Yeah, well, he was very clear about that. And it's like, oh my gosh. So I mean, I could go on because there's so many things, but those are the stories that I think are really important is like what has happened, what can we do, but in a way that's going to make sure that the solution we come up with isn't going to be another problem that we're going to have to deal with. And I'm really concerned about the moon because when we go to the moon, what are we going to do there? We're going to just throw our trash around and just not, I mean, you know, really, that's, you know, it's like, oh boy, let's not trash the moon. And I personally think that's what happened to Mars, but that's my whole story. I'm not going to say any more.
Thank you. There was actually good connection to what I also want to say. I always try to make the point when I talk to people about protecting the ocean that it's not only about protecting the ocean, it's also to protect ourselves. Because the oceans, they do what we call in science ecosystem services. So we get a lot out of the ocean. You know, we get food, we get medicine. So, for example, if you think of the COVID pandemic, all the sequencing we did wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have discovered some like very crazy little microbes that live at hydrothermal vents and extracted something from it that helps us to sequence. And so we get medicine. There's at the moment a lot of interest to harvest manganese nodules from the deep sea ocean because they have rare elements that we can use in our cell phones. But what does it do to the deep sea? You know, it's all these questions. What you also said about, you know, we don't think our consequences through. Like we like to first act and then, oops, you know, like now we have to do something about it. And so I think it's really important to remember that there are all these services we get from the oceans, and that if we don't protect the ocean, we also endanger ourselves. And I'm really looking at this year. We actually had maybe a decade ago. We had here on the stage a presentation of Chasing Coral, a documentary. You can see it on Netflix. The director was here, and they accidentally documented a massive die-off of coral reefs in 2015. They had like cameras there, and they saw how they bleached. That's when they, when the algae are leaving the corals, the symbionts, and then they died off. And that was because these corals were already stressed by, increasing temperatures due to our, raising the temperatures with putting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. But then there was an El Nino year, and that just like pushed the corals over what they can deal with. And this might happen again this year. So the temperatures are already warmer than they were 10 years ago, and now we're getting potentially even a super El Nino. So I wonder if this is the year where the coral reefs will die, or at least a big portion of them. And when I think of that, I not only think about the coral reefs, I also think about all the population of people that depend on fish protein. And a lot of island states, developing countries get 70% of their protein that they need from fish that they harvest from the ocean. And the coral reefs, they are an ecosystem that provides shelter for baby fish, for larvae, for the whole ecosystem to develop before the big fish goes out where we can catch it. And so I hope when you go home today that you think about what the oceans are giving to us, and what we are doing to ourselves when we do what we do to the oceans. And so, yeah, I think that was my point of what you need to know about the ocean.
Thank you. You know, you should never ask a professor that teaches oceanography what you need to know about the ocean, because you need a whole quarter for me to actually tell you. At least, well, maybe 4 years. So, you know, that's the first mistake. But I think what I so I teach an introductory, I teach the oceans, and it's a course that satisfies the UCSD has a climate change education requirement, so every undergraduate who graduates from UCSD has to have taken a class that satisfies this requirement, so I teach one of those courses. And there's a couple of things, I guess. So the first thing, it's related to what Tina just said, is that, you know, I always tell them, you know, the ocean has taken up 30% of the carbon dioxide that we've emitted into the atmosphere. So if the ocean hadn't done that, it would be a lot warmer. And that it's taken up 80% of the heat that has resulted from global warming. And so, you know, and this gets to the point of just the enormous service that the ocean provides. But then I try to take that information and try to connect it to sort of what are the cascades of events that take place as a result of that in the ocean. And I think, to me, that's one of the things that I try to convey in my courses when I give talks, is just the interconnectedness of all of these things, how these, you know, the ocean, of course, has no borders, nor does the atmosphere, right? So that's the first thing. But, you know, just trying to make the connection that, okay, you increase the heat. So we're talking about coral reefs and bleaching events associated with that. We talk about the fish and the birds that are associated with this. And then there are things that you might never think about, which is that actually impacts how much oxygen gets into the deep ocean, and that the oceans could lose their oxygen, or a significant portion of that in certain regions, as a result of the warming that we see on the planet. There's ocean acidification, we talk about that. So I try to demonstrate some of the connections, how the physics and the chemistry and the biology of the ocean sort of, you know, how they're impacted by a particular event. But one of the things I've also learned as I've been teaching now for the last 26 years or so is that it's really important to give students hope, because I think I have a 17-year-old son, and I know they're inundated, right? It's almost too much. When we talk about some of these things, it's important for students to understand that we're having an impact, but they also have to have agency to think that something can be done. And so I also talk about the oceans as being very much part of our solution. So while that has an extractive component to it, it's a fact that we can't, that the world will be a very different place if we don't figure out how to take out some of the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. I think that's the biggest, probably maybe the biggest issue of our future is even if we stopped emitting, which of course, unfortunately, we don't seem to want to do, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere will result in warming and likely go past the 2 degrees Celsius limit that we've set for ourselves. And so the ocean will become part of the solution. Tina talked about the manganese nodules. I think that's also inevitable, just because the alternative is to take it out of the land, right? Or, of course, the alternative could be we stop driving electric cars and give up our cell phones. That would be even better. But and so it's also important for the students to understand their solutions, but that you need to that it's really important to think through, as we've all said, this theme of trying to learn the connections, to think through the extent of our actions. We have, just as we have everything we need to solve the energy crisis, we have all the technology, we have all the science. We probably also have a lot of the knowledge that we need to understand the consequences for some of this. There's much more to learn, but I think we have a lot of the knowledge that we need. We can't plead ignorance anymore. And so that's one of the big goals for me when I teach my students, is to really understand this interconnectedness and the downstream impacts of various things that we are doing to the environment.
Okay, so I want to go deep in my 5 minutes here in two ways. One is to touch on the one thing that keeps me up at night is this MOVE, the International Seabed Authority, which is an organization that was created by the UN, but it's not a UN agency. And it doesn't have the full representation of the planet, because only the nations who have signed the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea are actually represented there. And then people who have not signed UNCLOS, like the US and Russia, are still there making arguments for going ahead with deep sea mining. So I've been going to the International Seabed Authority meetings. They are hosted twice a year in Kingston. And one of the things I've been working with a number of activist groups, and one of the things that is quite clear is that, number one, it's not a green transition, because they're not going to stop mining cobalt, having children go into mines in the Congo, and they're not going to stop that so they can then mine the sea, right? I think so. This idea that it's a green transition itself is a myth. And then the other element is that one of the things that's come out, and it's not a popular story, but anyone who attends these meetings hears it, is that there's so much capital they need to invest in these machines, and my colleagues who go out on these ships know how unbelievably expensive it is. So they're supposed to be, once they get in there and they start, number one, so they make it seem like they're harvesting potatoes on the bottom of the sea. These are ecologies that have not been disturbed in millions of years, right? And these are polymetallic nodules or accretions. They're not rocks. So let's say a shark tooth drops to the bottom of the floor, the seafloor, millions of years ago, then the metals in the ocean start to accrete around it. So they're looking at areas to mine that haven't, as I said, and there also are spaces of carbon sequestration. So the minute they start mining here, our carbon's going to be kicked up. Plumes are going to be sent all around the Pacific. And one of the areas that they have their eye on and they're working on right now and they're doing prospecting, is the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, which is between Hawaii and San Diego, and it's as large as the continental U.S. So I highly encourage you, somewhere in the slides here, I think there's 40 nations who have already said we were not going to take any metals that come from the bottom of the sea for all these reasons. Also, it's a myth that we did them for the cars, because all the major Honda, all the major automobile companies have actually signed a pledge that said they won't even use the minerals. So what is it? So one thing I'll add, my students know this, I say this all the time, capitalism needs a spatial fix, right? So it goes into an area and it says, I'm going to mine the hell out of this place, and now I'm going to find another place, leave it as a Superfund site, as the Montrose Company did, and then I'm going to dump my chemicals in a space that's understood to be the global commons, and that's our ocean. So it's constantly looking for new markets, and this whole, it's a charade that they're looking for, that we're actually going to get these minerals out of the sea. What they found out is that once they put in all the capital and once they start the mining, the amount of money that each nation will make, and I think there's 70 nations that are involved in this, is $30,000. So so they're going through these procedures. They're going through, okay, we got to do the mining code, and we have to do this, and we have to do this. But it's really, if you, I highly recommend the film called Deep Rising, which is, it's the guy with the deep voice who does it. Jason Momoa, yeah. He has a very deep voice, so it's very great narration for this. But he goes into this, and it's basically a shell game. So the Metals Company, which used to be the Nautilus Company, they went into Papua New Guinea. They did all this mining. They made themselves bankrupt. They made the nation of Papua New Guinea bankrupt. They destroyed some ecosystems, and then they rebranded themselves as the Metals Company, right? So they keep rebranding. They keep all this investment in the capital. Then they declare bankruptcy, and then they remorph into a new organization. So I would just be cautious once you start hearing that it's a sustainable model. Okay, so hope, which is, so one of my favorite quotations attributed to Frederick Jameson is that, why is it easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism? And then we know that there's the response from Ursula Le Guin, who says capitalism is a very modern system. It's very new, right? So we've had, monarchies and the rule of kings for millennia, right? So why can't we imagine ourselves outside of this? So when we talk about right, we talk about there's individual action that we can do, but then there's organizations, right, like Tina's organization, there's collective action that's very important. And I think one of the things that to me, the kind of elephant in the room is the structures of capitalism, right? That don't allow for us to have a choice. You know, when I was living in Germany last year, everything comes in glass, right? There's not the plastic. So the way in which we're consuming all these elements of plastics are part of this structure of our kind of super capitalistic society. And so one of the things that is really important is for us to come up with other kinds of stories, right? So this is the role of art, this is the role of journalism, of science, of all these different voices in order to come up with other kinds of imaginaries and imagining the future. And another concern that I have too is how we're understanding the future. So if we do have this tech pro idea that we're just going to exhaust our resources here and then we're going to go to another planet, that to me is I think to many people would be understood to be an incredibly limited idea of what the possibilities of the future are. So all these other elements of care, one of the things that we put in our description here is to actually think about the elements of care. So we can think about all the disasters, but we can also think about the aspects of care that brought us here together, that enabled us to have the time to have these conversations, that enabled us maybe to have the training, to then have the possibilities of imagining otherwise.
Deep stuff, right? I was going to bring up some of the stuff you're bringing up too. But I want to start with our connection. You'll notice that Adelia shared those beautiful abalone relatives, and we're all wearing our abalone because we bring the sea with us. It's so sacred to us, and we do believe that the abalone protects us. And when you look at some of the pictures that we shared, you see other kinds of shells, right? We have giant limpet shells that we use for our crowns when we dance and sing. These are forms of prayer, and it's because our people didn't believe in wasting. We utilized everything. Even, within nature, when you think about I'm trying to think of the animal, the swordfish. The swordfish would sometimes stab the whales, and then the whales would be beached onto our shores. And so all the people would share. Whale is huge, right? They would go and they'd send runners out to let all of the people know there's a whale here. It's going to die, so we're going to utilize it. We utilized every single part and dispersed it so that everybody could use it. It was so important way to be, to support your community. And even the whale bones, the Chumash would use those also another way to build your home, because you don't want to waste anything. Everything is reused. And then I mentioned that we're a mariner society. Both the Chumash and the Tongva both have wooden plank canoes, and it comes from the redwood trees. And the redwood trees, as we know, the forests are way up north. We have a little bit in the Angeles forest, but just very few. But as Adelia said, we never cut the trees down. Those are the standing tall nation. They're cleaning our air. They deserve to thrive. So what would happen is when these redwoods up north would live its life and fall, it would come through the water system because water was so abundant, and it would end up in our territories. And then we had the materials to be able to cut these huge, massive, beautiful redwood trees into planks. How would you do that when you don't have power tools? Because our people created tools out of nature. And they would cut these into planks, they would bend them, they would drill holes, they would sew them together with cordage made out of dog bane, and then they would seal it completely so that you could go into the ocean with it by using a natural occurring tar called asphaltum mixed with pine pitch, made a really strong glue. And so our people went from the mainlands back to our islands, our places of origins, and we traded with them, and that's how we stayed in contact with them. So I bring this up because I feel like we need to constantly be reminded that is our relative. The ocean is our relative. And so in my work that I have to always be speaking up for our ocean, because it's constant, the things that we're doing. Right now, our current administration is opening up our entire coast to leases for offshore oil drilling. And, we talked about oil spills, right? There's a company called Sable who owns now the Santa Ynez unit. That unit spilled and caused great harm. Lots of animals died. our paddlers who do the annual crossing still, even though it's been cleaned up, it's not really cleaned up. You can't get it all. They can smell it when they're out there paddling. It's just horrible. We have to stop doing this. And then you mentioned, the deep sea mining. Now we're going to open up leases for that too. Alaska, many places. The American Samoa. We stand with those relatives to protect the ocean because they too are so connected to this ocean. It's harmful. It hurts us to see the damage that's being done to our MoMA, to our sacred salt waters, and all of the life that thrives there. So I bring this up because all of us can use our voice, and all of us could use our vote. And I just came back from California Oceans Day at Sacramento, where we were talking to Assembly people and the Ocean Protection Council, and voicing all of this, and they all say they stand with us, but when it goes up to Congress, they don't always stand with us. So we need everybody's voice. The more they hear from you, the more they will change what the harms that they're doing. So yeah, that's all I wanted to share, really.
Thank you so much. Are we moving to the trailer now?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, we're going to see the trailer, and then we're going to open it for Q&A, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Trailer.
It was one of those holy crap moments. Somebody just filled this up with industrial waste, kicked it off of a ship, and it's just been sitting here on the seafloor ever since.
As I'm learning about the way we've polluted the ocean, I feel like we never really finished the DDT story.
There's still a whole lot we don't know. And this is ground zero. We're talking about a place where potentially 500,000 barrels of it were dumped.
We'll go ahead and put a team out there as soon as possible.
It's very abnormal to have a wildlife species developing a cancer at such a high prevalence.
It's striking just how much sea lions can tell us about the environment that we also live and swim and breathe in.
That's the part that to me is so scary. What are the long-term effects of this contaminant being out there? Not only to the wildlife, but to humans that, we're in this together, right?
This is another interpretation of what a forever chemical means, right? When people use that term, they often mean forever means it just sits in the environment and never goes away. Well, the impact may be forever, too.
Is the story that we're about to share with the public a unknown chapter of history, a secret chapter of history, or was it a forgotten chapter of history? We treated the ocean like the world's biggest trash can.
So if you stick around, you get to see that at 7:30. Rosanna, would you want to say a few words before we go into the Q&A about the film? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, sure. I mean, I think we have a lot of people on this panel who this film would not have been possible without all of your hard work and just what you've committed your life and your careers to doing day in, day out. So it's an honor just to be able to feature just so much of the work that you're doing. Yeah, the LA Times, we'll speak more about this tonight, but the LA Times went on this very interesting experiment where a newspaper decided to try to make a movie, and you get to watch it tonight at 7:30, and you can tell me what you think. And it was very, after the first article, which was prompted by Dave giving me a call many years ago now, it's this, I mean, the layers to the story, and again, to connect so much of what we've been discussing, it's all interconnected, and I think there was just something really compelling about bringing so much more of the story through a different medium. And I think that it is the first time the LA Times has made a feature-length film where the reporter directed and also helped produce the film, rather than having the film be like an adaptation of of an article or journalism. So I think it's just been a really interesting way to explore, again, oceanically, like how to tell this story in so many different aspects. And yeah.
Looking forward to that. So I think we can open this out to the Q&A, but we've just been instructed to wait for the microphone to come to you. So if you just put your hands
if
up.
you could raise your hand, I am but one drop among the whole ocean that we have here. So I will come to you. Please raise your hand. Please speak into the mic. We are recording this.
And I highly encourage our students in the sea around us to bring up some questions.
Hi, buenas tardes. My name is Andrea Leon Grossman, and I am the author of 2 books on energy, one in English, one in Spanish. I'm a Mexico-born immigrant, and I had the honor and pleasure to work with Tina and Adelia on stopping, and let's talk about hope, stopping the huge desalination plant that was proposed in Huntington Beach. We beat private equity, which had invested $100 million in getting the approval for the permit. We beat the governor because he had planned to get this thing on the books, and we defeated Trump as well. So, I mean, that was a huge win, and we know that when we fight, we win. And I wanted to make sure that, you know, we couldn't have done it with you all and with the Sunrise Movement. Again, you know, when we have youth, when we have environmental justice advocates fighting together, we can win. And the next big battle right now is, again, fighting this extractive economy. Just last night, there was a gas leak near LAX, and now they're trying to build this big boondoggle on the coast to basically have hydrogen pipelines next to LAX, next to the Hyperion plant. And to me, it's just, you know, like we just haven't learned our lesson in terms of climate change and in terms of, you know, what will happen if they store it as ammonia. If we have an ammonia leak, we have an ammonia explosion. And we know that if the Hyperion treatment plant has a failure, we could be potentially swimming in each other's sewage in the city of LA. So my question, I would love to hear again from you, Tina, and from you, Adelia, on like your reflections on the 4th year anniversary of the big win against Poseidon.
Oh gosh, I wasn't expecting to talk about that. But you know, I was so, my fierceness came out in that situation so big. Every once in a while I'll play that little minute or whatever 3-minute thing that I did, because, you know, the ignorance of human beings comes up in this kind of thing, and it's, you know, we don't think things through. But all I know is that I felt really strong that day for some reason. And then by winning in that situation, I guess you could say it was a win. You know, these people came in with their suits and their high heels, and they're so fancy, you know, and here we're, you know, we're humbly dressed, you know. And but I just think that, you know, we spoke what was on our hearts and our minds in a good way, that the commission and the people, they heard it. And I think that sometimes we have to come out of our shells, you know, and just speak. And it's really hard for me to do it. I you know, and Tina, I mean, it's so hard to do that. It really takes everything I have. But it was a good win, I guess. That's right. I completely wasn't thinking about that when we're here. Thank you for acknowledging that.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That's another issue, right, is desalinization. Why do we have the scarcity mentality? Why do we think we're going to run out of fresh water, so let's take it from the ocean? Let's take the salt out of the ocean. And where are you going to put that salt? It's too much for people to consume, so now you're going to throw it on the earth, and you're going to cause another imbalance. it's the scarcity mentality, and it doesn't make sense. So thank you for bringing it to everybody's attention, because sometimes things are happening and people are so busy with their lives they don't even know that these things are happening. And it's still, even though that one is a win, there's other companies that are still trying to do desalinization. There's one that even wants us as Native people to be on their advisory board, and I'm like, no, we don't support that. We're not going to be on your board. Because they say, well, we have a safer technology. We're going to go into the deep ocean where there's no life. There's no life? Who says there's no life? Because you can't go down there to see it? There's life. There's life everywhere there's water. And so now that they're having these cameras that can go way down there where humans can't go, they are seeing that there is life. It might not be the kind of life you're used to. It might be, little tiny nematodes or whatever they are, creatures, but they are life, and they deserve to live. So thank you for bringing that up.
I have a question over here.
I'll also just quickly add that in the area they're planning to do this deep sea mining in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, they found 5,000 new species just in 2023.
This is going to seem like a very trivial question, Adelia, but I wondered, and I hesitate to ask it, but I just wondered what that little boy said when you told the story, when he said, why don't you just chop down all the trees? That's all. I just have been wondering, sitting here, and fingers crossed.
Well, I must be honest with you. That day, I was like in shock. I didn't know how to respond to him. I was, because it was like, it was so, I think I learned more that day than he did, in the sense of, I just saw it in real life, what happened. It was just automatic. He just said, well, why don't we just chop down trees and build houses like we do today? Why didn't they do that? Why? And so I didn't that day. I must be honest with you. I didn't that day answer him in a way that I think would have done better. So now whenever I go to classes, I do, if that comes up, because I had to think about it. It was so shocking to me. It was. It's like I'm overwhelmed by the young ones sometimes. I get really upset because there's a lot of privileged kids walking around thinking that they are owed everything. And when I see it, I get so angry. I have to be very careful to control myself, because I can't just give a lecture right then and there, But I know that we need to speak to those young ones and to teach them as best we can, to do good things. And so where I go to environments where I have a better chance of talking to kids like that, where the family's already starting to show something that, they want their kids to learn. So, I have the parent support, which is really important, because if you have a kid and then you don't have any way of knowing how their family thinks, they're just going back to the same environment, So I do that. I do that a lot, speaking to families and speaking to the kids of these families that want to change, that they want their kids to learn. So that was a good question. Thank you.
Another question?
Hi, I was wondering, in the trailer, you were talking, Rosanna, about the DDT spill and this chapter of history and whether it's a secret, hidden chapter or a forgotten one. And I was thinking about that in context of the ocean having stories to tell, having information, and also about remembering our answers. And so I was wondering if there are different consequences to hiding and keeping secret the truth versus the consequences to forgetting them. And not just to you, but anyone. Are there different consequences to that? Either the deliberateness of hiding or the deliberateness of not remembering?
That's a really beautiful question. I really love the way you phrased it. I would love to hear what some of you all think. This is so journalistic of me being like, I don't want to answer the question. I think one thing I will add, and then whoever wants to chime in, is the fact that, spoiler alert, it was a chapter of history that we just collectively forgot. I think that something that I run into a lot as an environmental journalist is our collective apathy. And I think that it's easier when you watch a story, you see an issue and there's a clear villain, right? You know how to channel your anger and you know who to be mad at, and that there's like kind of more of a catalyst for action and change. But like, what if the villain is our apathy? And I think that's, or like the fact that each individual can feel like they don't have to engage because what they do will not make a difference as an individual, but collectively, if every single individual on this planet chooses to look away because they alone do not feel powerful enough to make a change, then we go nowhere. So I think that's a very philosophical and meta, long-winded way of saying that. I think that forgetting is convenient. Forgetting allows us to continue repeating the same mistakes again without fully learning the lessons of our past. I think not knowing is also, I think that is where so much of our work, this is where I feel my sense of duty, right? That like in order to inspire change, to inspire action, to help more people connect the dots, it does begin with knowing and allowing, like shining light on, you know, even just activating kind of conversations like this. Sorry, your question is just really moving and my brain is going in so many different directions. I don't think I'm giving this away, but the film, and I do hope as many of you as possible can come tonight, like, and the conversation we will continue after the film. The film begins with a Rachel Carson quote, and it's the obligation to endure gives us the right to know. That's what the film begins with. It's in chapter 2 of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And I remember when Dave first, shared with me what you discovered underwater, and I was like, oh my God. And, I live in like sea level rise land and marine heat wave land and climate change world. And I'm like, what am I going to do when I, drop this story on people and give them one more thing to freak out about and feel depressed about and feel helpless about? And then I got to that as I was rereading Rachel Carson and rereading Silent Spring, I got to that quote and I was like, oh my God, that is the thesis of why we do what we do. Like the obligation truly to continue living with these chemicals and the pollution that we have left for future generations gives the future generations the right to know at least that it happened. And from there, how do we collectively, move away from our apathy towards something that actually inspires action and, choosing to be better stewards of our planet and to live in better reciprocity with both the land and the water.
That is such a beautiful question, and thank you, Ruth. We've been thinking about this in our classroom in terms of kind of the limits of our knowledge. So there's multiple layers here that I'm hearing. One is that the frustration that we may find when we find out about these things is also because we're part of a system that mystifies our relationship to our goods, to the things that we wear, to the food that we eat. The fact that we can think, oh, we'll just find another tree to chop down, right? It doesn't matter. We'll just go to Costco and get more trees, or go to Home Depot and get more trees, right? And it's interesting to put that in conversation with this idea of scarcity, right? Because there's a sense of scarcity, but there's always a sense that we need to get something from somewhere else, right? So that idea that I mentioned, the spatial fix, there's always going to be another market that we can tap into. So we don't look at these, that wood is life, right? And so that mystifies our relationship to our whole being, right? All the things around us, and then it makes it feel like we're not part of that. So I think there's aspects of forgetting, but then there's aspects in which we're not, there's structures that don't allow us to see, right? And I think this is the beautiful work that you do, Rosanna, in terms of kind of lifting the veil on those structures and letting us understand our implication of that. And then the other layer too that I think a lot about is that like on the one hand, there's ways of telling these stories and bringing them to light and shining a light on these stories, but then that also can be co-opted by, for instance, like Shell Oil now is trying to map the seafloor, right? And so they're asking writers to write about it and all kinds of, community members to contribute. But they're doing that because the more they know, the more they can extract, right? So I think there's another side of knowing is also the kind of humility of not knowing, I think can also be a productive position to be in.
And I'm thinking about, as a professor, teaching design and teaching the arts. At one point, I just had to change completely how I taught. So for about, I would say the last 15 years, I've been teaching around subject of ecological arts and justice. And we formalize now the courses. It's a course sequence where we do survey, where we do research, and then we do practice. And that's a year. And what I know that has happened is that the students are so ready to know. They want to know because they know that it is this knowledge that is going to be able to then help them to be able to make decisions and even channel their own way of creating their own artwork. But we go through a period where exactly just like they just feel it, and the research puts them in a place that there is no place to run. You just have to look at it, feel it, and they tell me, it's like, okay, what do I do now that I am utterly depressed? And it is, we all do. You feel it, and then you change that one, right? So there is a sense that you need to rage, but we need to rage with creativity, and you need to rage even with love for your planet. And so it is so beautiful to see the students going through this kind of knowing, it's only knowing, and then the paralysis hits, and then the creativity begins to kind of, they begin to feel it in their body, right? They begin to kind of feel this depression and just like, no, let's create with this. But it's such a process that once you have that process ready, then you know what to expect in your process of creativity. And so I think that that's why I created my laboratory, the Counterforce Lab. So we are a counterforce to everything that is happening. And that's when I teach third graders, right? We're teaching them about ecology. And so it's something that it is so important to be able to know that that process that you need to go through as a creative person.
Can I say something too? Yeah, sometimes, just hits. Like, I know that you're feeling these things here, like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And so I am not a negative person. I'm very positive in my thinking and what I, want to accomplish and what I want to teach and that. But I sometimes, I have to feel that pain first. I have to feel it. I have to really get into it. And then it's all of a sudden, it's like I see myself swirling around and then coming up. And one morning I woke up and I went, oh. And I saw, and I don't know if this is so, but when I see these kinds of things, it's like, it gives me this amazing feeling. It's like, I saw a baby being born. I didn't know if it was a male or a female baby, but what I saw was that this young one was going to learn and teach us about handling radiation from nuclear waste. That little being was going to grow up and figure that out for human beings, and there was a solution. And I don't know where that came from or why, but it just gave me such a feeling of hope that there are beings. We here, maybe your great-grandchild will be the one. I don't know, but to think like that, I was like, wow, is that like insane thinking or what? But you know what? It is possible because we are amazing. We're human beings. We're so amazing. Our intelligence is vast. Just as we began to acknowledge that the intelligence of the ocean is vast and full, and there are probably smarter beings in the ocean than we've even discovered. So there is that. And that's what I kind of look towards, because otherwise, why would I get out of bed in the morning? So I just have this hope within. And so I hope that, in learning and dialoguing and watching the film is that somehow we don't give up, that we say, okay, this is only going to give me more to want to change things and do good and to whatever we can do as an individual. So not to feel helpless.
We have time for maybe one more question.
Can I be journalist for a second? I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with your question now, and I am really curious what Dave and Lahini and Tina and Alyssa might think, just from a scientific research perspective, the consequences of not knowing versus forgetting, and how that might apply or trickle down in your spaces, or even when you discovered the barrels, or even Lahini when you started putting pieces together based on what is being revealed. I'm just, and Alyssa and Tina as well, I'm just fascinated by this form of the question.
Do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I think I can be very quick. It's a very interesting question, and what's been going through my mind really is that if you're intentionally hiding something, you're doing something wrong, and that sort of permeates this particular situation. Like, somebody knew they were doing something wrong, they were hiding something. But if it's just a matter of forgetfulness, that's a mindset that people go into something with, right? So, in that era, dilution was the solution to pollution. What we're doing isn't wrong. That was, I think, sort of the thinking of the time. And so, I sort of take the juxtaposition of those of, the intentionality, the hiding, knowing that you're wrong, but also this mindset and trying to balance those. I don't think there's a clear direction in my mind as to which was enforced at the time, probably a bit of both.
Yeah, for me, it's always interesting about how people not think about the consequences of things that they do, and I've been thinking a lot about DDT in the ocean. I've been having discussions with people, and to me, it's a little bit, even though this is a bigger problem, but if you think about Chernobyl, for example, it's something that is packed up. We don't touch it. We leave it there. I was 13 when it happened, and I had my rabbits out, and my parents told me, take the rabbits in, there's a cloud coming. And it's something where humanity had to accept that there's nothing we can do. It's sitting there, and it will be there for a very long time. And so with the DDT barrels, knowing that they're there but feeling unable to do something, is a situation I think that humans don't like to accept. We always want to be in control, and but I think we need to learn from these things. We need to do better, and next time we do something, think first, right? And so what I always hope is, you talked about the people who did things knowingly. If, you might wonder if you can help them or not. But what I always hope is that there are so many people out there that would just do different decisions if they would know, and I think that's part of what I feel as an educator, particularly since I teach general education classes. These students, they might do very different things in science, and I always hope that when they're in a position, maybe become a lawyer or politicians or whatever they are out to do, that they think back of the oceans and what are the consequences of our doings are. And so I think knowing is important, and it gives people tools in their hands.
But also like our desire to have something be done. So like we banned DDT in 1972 in the US, and then that story was over, right? Like, and we just moved on. We thought the problem was solved. But Dr. Deming is still finding DDT in wildlife. Lahini, every time you analyze a sample and look at the molecules, there is still this chemical that became a chapter in history that you learn in Chemistry 101, and that we've relegated to a story of the past. Like, that's also a choice, that we thought that we solved something and then we moved on. And we're doing that today with other chemicals that, there's so many parallel conversations to all of this stuff. What happens if we do ban deep sea mining? Are we done with that story? Is that just the end of the issue? Is the action complete? And I think that is also the beginning of forgetting if we choose not to remain engaged. So, sorry, these are all half-baked thoughts that are being activated by a very powerful question.
I'll say something just very quickly and just use a cliche that knowledge is power. And so we're a bit powerless if we don't know what the problems are. And just a juxtaposition for some of the pictures that have been put up, there's a humpback whale that's on the beach that was stranded. And it was up in Oregon, and as a vet that unfortunately has to deal with very sick animals and sometimes has to euthanize them, I was up in Oregon and was able to help that whale that had no other efforts. We attempted to, refloat it. We did everything we could to get it off the beach and back into the ocean. The ocean conditions weren't good. The animal's condition was declining, and as a vet, I had the opportunity to step in and humanely euthanize that animal, which is a very heavy decision and obligation that I feel like I have to take care of animals. The community was outraged at us for making the decision to euthanize that whale. And although I have 100% respect for everybody's feelings about euthanasia, we did not put that whale on the beach. That whale was entangled in Dungeness crab gear, and that whale represented one of thousands of whales I see every year that are hit by boats or entangled in crab traps. And because that whale was in front of these people, they were outraged that we had to make that difficult decision to humanely euthanize it, and the anger was directed towards me. And then by having very open conversations, we worked with the tribal people. They were able to collect parts, and they were actually able to bridge that gap with the community up in Oregon. They do a great job with that. And it was the knowledge of them understanding the root of the problem. It wasn't the decision that we had to make in that very tough situation to euthanize it. It was the crab gear that got a very healthy juvenile whale into that problem. And they redirected with that knowledge their frustrations and angers to something that could solve a potential tangible solution. And so I think that's just one example of how knowledge can be really powerful, so you can harness that energy, that frustration, that rage at something that's constructive, an action item that's meaningful, that you can do something about, that will really make a change. Because people get frustrated about the DDT, everyone wants to know what to do. And when you tell them stop putting stuff in the ocean, they're like, well, I don't want to stop taking, this or that. But like I said earlier, we're all a part of this problem. And so making sure we can educate ourselves and learn the truths so we can figure out what we can do better in a meaningful way. It's all a cycle. If we can figure out ways to close those loops and live with the carbon dioxide and oxygen trading off in a meaningful way, I mean, that really is the world we live in. And we're not outside of nature. We're in it and actually having the biggest impact on it. So.
And I think that one very quick thing, because I am definitely caught in this idea of that apathy, right? It's like that people, sometimes they know, but then even myself is like, okay, because I'm just going to open this little bottle of water, and I know that it's a, one-time use. And so it happens a lot. So the project that I did with my students that has been the most effective has been for them to document all of their waste for 7 days. But I'm teaching photography, I'm teaching graphic design, so they need not only to document it photographically, I teach them how to use a camera, all of that, but then where it came from, what it's made out of, where is it going to go. And with the UCLA Sustainability Office, we went to the compost, we went to the recycling factory, and then we went to a facility, and then we went to the landfill. And so after that, they were so shocked to know all the waste they were producing in 1 week. They created a beautiful book, and then the next one was what change of habit, because that's where that comes from. If you're not going to do anything with that information, what is it for, right? And that is where the ignoring, like choosing to forget, because we know so many things, but we choose to forget. And it was so beautiful for them to, just take an entire other book to step by step what habit they were going to break. And, they still today tell me that changed the way that they dealt with at least one thing that was useful.
I'll just say something really quickly. So I can't forgive people for forgetting, is what I'll say. But so one of the things as we look at, for example, some of the deep sea fish, the little myctophids, little guys, and look at the chemicals that are accumulating in them. One of the things that's sort of striking, and this is also true for the higher organisms, is that a lot of the chemicals that we find in there were banned in the 80s, right? So they were all manufactured around the same time in the 40s and the 50s, and then they were banned in the 80s. And there's a lot more there. There are things like the brominated flame retardants that look just like PCBs that we thought were fine, to make, and they were banned in 2010, actually. But one thing recently, as I've been looking at that data, I'm like, why the 80s, right? It's when we had laws, we had environmental laws, EPA came into play. And now we've forgotten how important it is. Now we're disbanding all of those organizations and bodies that were there to try to protect the environment. So I am concerned that we are forgetting, and that we did have some ways to protect the environment. But yeah, so it is something that really resonated with me when my student went through and she said, oh yeah, I'm going to make a table of when these chemicals started being made and when they were banned, and you just keep seeing the 1980s show up And it's kind of heartbreaking to think about it, really.
And I can also mention that it's the 75th anniversary of the Sea Around Us, and it was Rachel Carson, not alone, but certainly in the U.S., was one of the voices who articulated this, and which is where we ended up with the EPA, right? So it's also a testimony to the kind of environmental work and science and journalism and storytelling, right, in order to change public opinion.
Claro, so we shouldn't feel powerless, because I think that is the one thing that, if we all would end up making those decisions to have a voice, and now more than ever, our voice matters, because definitely the attacks on the EPA, the destruction of the EPA is going to have horrendous consequences, is having already.
So, are we ready now to sing?
Yes, let's do that. I think that would be beautiful. So we are... Adelia is going to close this wonderful panel with ceremony and song. So we are inviting Mariah. She's going to join us. Yeah, do you need a chair? 2 chairs, right?
I love that we have a multi-species panel here.
Oh, we need to do the microphone, huh?
Do you want me to hold it?
Yeah, maybe somebody can hold it, or... One hold one and one hold the other one. Okay. Yes. Thank you. So first let me talk. I'm going to, before we sing, we're going to sing the ocean song appropriately. I'm going to hold up this abalone, and one of the things that our people, the Yahashiman people, I'm sure the coastal people, is the abalone is a beautiful gift, and we consider her the womb. The shell is like the womb, and she has medicine. And some of our ancestors would look at the patterns inside the shell, and they would foretell a future, so to speak. But I also learned that it also gives a blessing. And so what I'm going to do is take a moment and just hold it up and just scan it across the room, and then Mariah and I will sing. Tinggal pietal boom hohan champururiun omomat kipoi halonga nak my wuntum patinggal pietal boom hohan champururiun omomat kipoi halonga nak my wuntum patinggal pietal boom hohan champururiun omomat kipoi halonga nak my wuntum patinggal pietal boom hohan champururiun Omo matki poi halonga, omo matki poi halonga, knock my wuntum, patingal piatalpum, ho hun, champururi woon, omo matki poi halonga, knock my wuntum, oh, one more.
Pot 6.
Okay. Patingal piatalpum, ho hun, champururi woon, omo matki poi halonga, knock my wuntum, ho!
Thank you.
Adelia, do you want to tell us Patingal Pietal?
Oh.
That's so
okay. Yes.
We have to
So,
know the story.
Patingal is the name or the word for dolphin in the language, Hashman. And talpum is the pelican, which I just love the pelican. It's good medicine. I use the feathers of the pelican for healing. Anyway, the story is, here's a dolphin. Just a single dolphin swimming like this. And then all of a sudden, here comes a pelican. And for a moment, just for a moment, they see eye to eye. It's like this precious moment. I don't even know what they were thinking when they were looking at it. It's personal between the two of them, but it was a moment, you know. And then all of a sudden, we're standing at the ocean's edge, and we're listening. Kind of like the story that I read to you earlier. And then I think that's it. Yes. That's it. That's
Beautiful.
the story. So
I love
there
that.
you have it.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So just a reminder, definitely tonight, come and join us for Out of Plain Sight. Place at 7:30. And after the film, we're going to have a post-screening conversation. Rosanna, Elizabeth, and myself. So just join us, and thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for coming.
And thank you, all of you. An honor to be here with you.